Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Autumn and I'm a student studying botany at the University of Maine. This is the first video in my series about rewilding, permaculture, and food sovereignty and how all of these can be achieved in a northeastern landscape. Specifically in so-called Maine because that's where my university resides, so that's where I'll be doing the majority of my research. If you want to support me in my research, please consider watching to the end of this video and subscribing to my channel. And if you want to learn more about what I'm up to, check out my website in the description, where I post my blog and my adventures often. I want to clarify that rewilding is still a developing term, and there's lots of research and science being done to define what rewilding might mean. One of my main goals is to rewild the unused space at my own university. However, to get to that level of research and planning, I have to really understand and do a deep dive of what rewilding may mean in general. My analysis of rewilding will be in two parts. The first part, this video, will capture the history, context, and definitions of rewilding, and the second part will be rewilding perspectives, which is a more intimate analysis of what rewilding may mean, to who, and why. So please enjoy, hit the like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. To start the video off, I'll be using the Wikipedia definition to get a baseline of what the average person might perceive rewilding to be. Rewilding is a form of ecological restoration aimed at increasing biodiversity and restoring natural processes. It differs from other forms of ecological restoration in that rewilding aspires to reduce human influence on ecosystems. It is also distinct from other forms of restoration in that, while it places emphasis on recovering geographically specific sets of ecological interactions and functions that would have maintained ecosystems prior to human influence, rewilding is open to novel or emerging ecosystems, which encompass new species and new interactions. Let's first define biodiversity. It's a term used a lot in ecological fields, but can be daunting to someone who is trying to understand ecosystem health for the first time. So what does biodiversity mean? To unpack that, we must first understand the concept of the trophic pyramid. A trophic level for an organism is the position it holds on the food web. Further into the food web, there are differing food chains that all relate to one another in some shape or form. If you take a look at this model, it shows all the levels of the trophic pyramid. It's made up of three main components: decomposers, producers, and consumers. The decomposers and consumers are both heterotrophs because they eat other matter for energy and nutrients, the consumers eating plant or animal matter, and the decomposers eating decomposing matter. This pyramid is showing all the different trophic levels. The first level is the layer underneath the soil, and in the top layer of the earth called humus consists of decomposers, which can be mushrooms, worms, and various insects and invertebrates. These organisms are extremely important because they create the base that the rest of the pyramid needs to thrive. Soil scientists do the majority of their research in this layer of the earth and the many microbiomes it possesses. The layer above the decomposers are composed of the producers, or plants and algae that make their own food through photosynthesis. That's my main focus of study as a botany student. Above that layer is the herbivores, or animals that mainly eat plants, insects, or anything below them on the pyramid. The primary predators are the predators that eat the herbivores, and the secondary predators eat the primary predators. The predators at the very top of the pyramid are called apex predators. They are the consumers that have no predators above them, many of which are considered keystone species. Keystone species are species that are connected to every other aspect of the food web. Because apex predators are at the top of the pyramid, their actions can cascade all the way down to the bottom. Oftentimes, if a keystone species is removed, it leads to a drastic change in the ecosystem. Biodiversity wants to include as much variety without tipping the trophic networks out of balance. There must be a balance of ecological systems. For example, in a northeastern forest landscape, there must be a ground layer of herbaceous plants, then shrubbery and small trees and vines that establish their territory both vertically and horizontally, and then the canopy. And of course, under all that is the root system. All of these forest layers provide habitats and food systems for the organisms and animals in that ecosystem. The concept of rewilding has evolved from its initial emphasis on protecting large, connected areas for large carnivore conservation to a process-oriented, dynamic approach. on the basis of concepts from resilience and complexity theory of social ecological systems, we identify trophic complexity, stochastic disturbances, or the introduction of randomness and unpredictability, and dispersal as three critical components of natural ecosystem dynamics. We propose that the restoration of these processes and their interactions can lead to increased self-sustainability of ecosystems and should be at the core of rewilding action. The concept of rewilding challenges us to rethink the way we manage nature and to broaden our vision about how nature will respond to changes that society brings, both intentionally and unintentionally. The effects of rewilding actions will be specific to each ecosystem, and thus a deep understanding of the processes that shape ecosystems is critical to anticipate these effects and to take appropriate management actions. There have been many criticisms of rewilding due to the vagueness of the definition. I actually treasure it for this reason, because it can serve as an umbrella for a multitude of different scientific practices and niches that can fit into the scope of rewilding as a whole. Rewilding also signifies a promising new dialogue between scientists and networks of grounded conservation professionals who are coming together to drive innovation in ecological recovery and societal change. To get an understanding of what it may mean to rewild, we must look back to the indigenous practices that allowed humans to have a mutualistic and symbiotic relationship with the environment rather than the extractivist one we see today. Because I'm stationed in the northeast portion of Turtle Island and doing my research in so-called Maine, I will be looking towards the Wabanaki Alliance, the Penobscot, Maliseet, Micmac, and Passamaquoddy nations. At the closest glance, the Penobscot Nation, because that is the specific region my university is located. Before I go too in-depth, we must understand that not all indigenous cultures are sustainable, but all human cultures that have been demonstrated to be sustainable are indigenous. Recent scholarship from Dr. Suzanne Greenlaw and Dr. Michelle Baumfluck has explored how indigenous stewardship has supported biodiversity for at least 12,000 years, positively compared indigenous conservation to non-indigenous conservation, shown the importance of indigenous governance and effective conservation, demonstrated the important role of indigenous peoples' land management in supporting nation-states to achieve their climate change mitigation goals, and proven that Wabanaki gathering practices benefit marshland ecology by enhancing the growth of culturally important grasses. The impact of these studies has created a new set of best practices and open possibilities for land trusts and conservation groups to support indigenous land return and conservation efforts. The Penobscot Nation is now promised to have 30,000 acres of land returned to them through the Trust for Public Land along the east branch of the Penobscot River, which is the heart of the tribe's ancestral hunting and fishing territory. Penobscot forestry practices involve prioritizing the river habitat and reducing erosion by selecting trees farther from the water's edge. This helps keep riverbanks shady and protects threatened fish like the Atlantic salmon. The Penobscot Nation's fish and game laws are distinct from those of the state, and part of Loring's job is to ensure resources are managed sustainably so tribal members and non-members alike can hunt and fish. In the fall, the tribe auctions off several moose hunts led by Penobscot guides to non-tribal hunters. A great example of the importance of native stewardship is found at Acadia National Park. The National Park Service had previously had a very hands-off approach to land conservation. However, the Wabanaki tribes had for thousands of years worked with the land to manage it and keep it healthy. The problem with hands-off conservation today is that it leaves plenty of leeway for invasive species to get the upper hand in these ecosystems that have no way of combating them. Nearly a third of the park's plant species are non-native, and some of these species are extremely invasive and threaten the integrity of our natural communities. You will find invasive plants spreading into the more pristine and less disturbed areas of Acadia's forest, wetlands, and islands. The invasive plants at Acadia National Park include Japanese barberry, purple loosestrife, glossy buckthorn, and Maro's honeysuckle, to name a few. It's evident that a hands-off approach to conservation is not beneficial because these invasive plants can outcompete the native wild plants that have evolved to live in these landscapes. Wabanaki people evolved alongside these ecosystems for thousands of years and developed this successful symbiosis that influenced their cultures and stories. One example of this symbiosis is the relationship to sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is very difficult to plant directly from seed, so the indigenous technique was to plant plugs directly into the ground and to only harvest what you needed. The plant has this relationship with the Wabanaki peoples, and it is ingrained into their culture. Under the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970, any harvesting agreement required an environmental assessment and determination that there will be no significant impact to park resources. Scientific experiments showed that harvesting won't harm plant populations or the surrounding ecosystem. In Acadia National Park, Wabanaki scientists and cultural experts have led to the response to the rule change. Wabanaki communities have set the priorities for which plants to focus on, with sweetgrass being number one. Suzanne Greenlaw advocated that requiring an environmental assessment is burdensome for Native communities. Science emphasizes objectivity, passive voice, random sampling, and statistical analysis. It privileges the written word. In doing so, it perpetuates the power structure that disenfranchises Wabanaki knowledge, which is based on practical experience and oral communication. The National Park Service is supposed to be using the best available science, but they often perceive the best available science as published research, says Greenlaw. This is a very narrow understanding of the natural world, and often doesn't support Indigenous practices as part of the science. This is one of the reasons that I'm making this video series. Yes, it's to advance my own research, but also to make my research easy and accessible to people. I'm working hard not to use excessive jargon, and providing definitions and explanation for the jargon that I do use. Having accessible education and resources to these topics is really important to me. If we want to make a long-lasting impact on the environment, these studies must not be the elitist ones we see solely in scientific journals behind immense paywalls that aren't accessible. If you have any questions about the language that I use or want a more in-depth explanation, please leave a comment and I will do my best to provide you with a resource that will suit your needs. Rewilding is not simply conserving the environment, it surpasses that. It is restorative regeneration of the landscapes that evolved here to suit the wildlife through the people around it. This doesn't simply mean turning everything back into a wild forest, but we can remake systems that work for people and planet through the systems of the past. This can be done through sustainable agricultural and gardening practices like regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, permaculture, agroecology, biodynamic farming, syntropic farming, traditional farming, and indigenous agriculture, all of which are rooted in traditional and indigenous farming techniques and help to regenerate the trophic pyramid and biodiversity. These processes often take heavy management in the beginning of the regeneration and throughout if it is for food cultivation, though through this management there would be a lot more balance of the ecosystem and much more natural protection for communities from natural disasters and prevention of total planetary collapse. There are currently many examples of creating a food forest in tropical environments. However, less so in the northeastern landscapes of the US due to the colonial restrictions on many indigenous practices that are still in place. Though with lots of changing policy and advocacy, many of these practices are becoming priority in this restorative age. Consider that 80% of biodiversity on the planet is to be found on indigenous territory. Saying that humans are responsible for ecological devastation is a continuation of colonial racism, and it's an insult to the peoples who have fought against obliteration to preserve their way of life and their relationship with their territory. It is also an insult to the many people who, despite growing up in a culture totally infused with the values of capitalism, have risked their lives and freedom to defend the land and halt destructive development projects. And it is an insult to the hundreds of millions who are subjected to extreme poverty or absolute precarity by the very same economic order that profits from ecocide, who have to worry about their personal survival and that of their family and community, and do not have the luxury of choosing between a different job opportunity and consumer products based on how ecological they might be. I would also like to read a portion of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is an educator and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. I haven't finished the book yet, but what I've already read is so profound, and it's just so filled with wisdom about what it's like to have a reciprocal relationship to the environment, so that's pretty cool. Those fields of my childhood showered us with strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, hickory nuts in the fall, bouquets of wildflowers brought to my mom, and family walks on Sunday afternoon. They were our playground, retreat, wildlife sanctuary, ecology classroom, and the place where we learned to shoot tin cans off the stone wall, all for free, or so I thought. Gifts from the earth, or from each other, establish a particular relationship, an obligation of sorts to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. The field gave to us, we gave to my dad, and we tried to give back to the strawberries. When the berry season was done, the plants would send out slender red runners to make new plants. Because I was fascinated by the way they would travel over the ground looking for good places to take root, I would weed out little patches of bare ground where the runners touched down. Sure enough, tiny little roots would emerge from the runner, and by the end of the season there were even more plants, ready to bloom under the next strawberry moon. No person taught us this. The strawberries showed us, because they had given us a gift. An ongoing relationship opened between us. We must also understand that when we're looking towards solutions towards the climate crisis, we must be aware of our language when talking about the problems and solutions. Radical environmentalists recognize that ecology, with its focus on connecting humans with one another and with the non-human world, is inherently at odds with growth that separates and conquers. The rise of mainstream discourse on sustainable development effectively erased the radical promise of ecology. The notion of sustainability emerged from the 1992 Earth Summit, neutralized and depoliticized the conflict between environment and growth. Since then, negotiations between government, business, and pragmatic environments have assumed that new markets and technologies can simultaneously boost economic growth and protect natural systems. Environmental problems have been largely consigned to the realm of technical improvement, the province of experts and policy elites. Successful rewilding is not something you could just throw together. There's countless amount of research in paleontology, indigenous tradition and history, ecology, evolution, botany, agriculture, and in social movements to share these disciplines with the world. Up until the migration of modern humans out of Africa 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, grassland megafauna biomes covered immense swaths of the planet, outcompeting forests in regions where temperatures and precipitation were lower or strongly seasonal. In 2005, South African ecologist William Bond challenged the prevalent green world hypothesis by arguing that large parts of it were brown or black. In his multicolored view, Bond argued that vegetation communities in any given locality may have had elements of 3 possible ecosystems depending on history, magnitude, and nature of different types of control, available resources, the green part, grazers, the brown part, and fire, the black part. These interactions created a diverse and dynamic global ecology with numerous niches for organisms to evolve and thrive. Our planet was vibrant and bursting with life. The amount of different biomes we have on Earth is immense, each with their own unique microbiomes, ecosystems, and habitats for various organisms and animals. There are 5 major defined biomes on our Earth: aquatic, grassland, forest, desert, and tundra. Our freshwater biomes include ponds, rivers, and lakes. Our marine biomes, which cover 3/4 of the surface of the Earth, contain oceans, coral reefs, and estuaries. We have tropical grasslands and temperate grasslands, which include prairies and steppes. Temperate, tropical, and boreal forests cover 1/3 of the Earth and contain most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, such as birds, insects, and mammals. There are cold, hot, semi-arid, and coastal deserts that have their own ecosystems, and there's the Arctic and alpine tundra, which have the lowest ranging temperatures ranging from -34 to 12 degrees Celsius. Pleistocene Rewilding, an optimistic agenda for 21st century conservation, a paper authored by a group of U.S. conservation scientists led by Josh Jonlin, pointed out that assemblies of large vertebrates produce complex food webs, and that the continental scale declines of megafauna over the millennia have resulted in downgrading nature. They outlined an agenda to restore ecological functions through the reassembly of remaining large herbivore guilds, such as elk, bison, and feral horses, and even introduced species from different faunal regions, such as camels. The belief was that such surviving wild herbivores could do the ecological job of lost species, and that this rewilding was a better alternative than doing nothing or relying on the aging and failing protectionist approach of the 1970s. So what is megafauna? The Pleistocene is also known as the Ice Age, and megafauna are mammals that are over 100 pounds, including the mastodon, woolly mammoth, woolly rhino, lion, and short-faced bear. all of which are now extinct. It is hypothesized that they were hunted to extinction by human hunter-gatherers. Some indigenous cultures harbored a wasteless approach to hunting. Bison provided food and other resources, and Northern Plains people honored and cared for the bison through ceremonies and other cultural protocols. Before European arrival in North America, it is estimated that 30 to 60 million buffalo thrived on the plains. Josh Donlan and those who inspired him clearly articulated a key rewilding principle, namely that conservation should use ecological history as a guide to actively restore ecological and evolutionary processes. This principle can also be summed up as taking inspiration from multiple past natures to shape future natures. This proposes a clear departure from the established focus of conservation, which was avoiding extinctions and managing habitats to maintain an assumed natural baseline. Public awareness on the wanton slaughter of wildlife and the rising number of extinctions only started to build with the rise of the global news media towards the end of the 19th century, and the first international conference on wildlife protection was not until 1933. What we know about the impact of commercial hunting on wildlife and ecosystems is patched together from a mix of explorers' accounts, histories of colonial commerce, and a few better researched case studies. For example, the slaughter of bison herds of the North American plains is well known. At the height of carnage, hunters mowed down herds with rifle fire, taking only their tongues, which were tinned and transported to the cities of the East Coast. The carcasses were left to decompose, after which the skulls and bigger bones were collected and grounded into fertilizer. The term rewilding was actually coined by Dave Foreman in 1992. He was an activist, thinker, writer, and speaker on conservation and environmental issues. He co-founded the Rewilding Institute and wrote the acclaimed books including The Big Outside, Take Back Conservation, Confessions of an Eco-Warrior, and the esteemed Rewilding North America. His ecological philosophy was rooted in deep ecology, and he had often summarized his vision for rewilding through the 3 C's: cores, corridors, and carnivores. The broad C's of rewilding, cores, corridors, and carnivores, largely encapsulate the conservation rationale behind the most large-scale rewilding endeavors, whose grander aim is to increase biodiversity, reverse extinction trends in several species, and revive ecological machinery to mitigate climate change. This includes identifying and demarcating a large core, invalid of humans, region in need of ecological restoration, and allowing regeneration of degraded and imbalanced ecosystems. For smooth movement of animals, such as wide-ranging large carnivores and genetic flow between animal populations, ensuring healthy connectivity between such core areas and other wilderness areas is crucial. Wildlife corridors connecting 2 or more cores need to be restored with the help of local communities, preserved and protected. Carnivores represent the apex predators within ecosystems, whose presence and reintroduction within a landscape enables ecosystem revival. Some examples of current rewilding projects in the Northeast are Rewild Maine, a nonprofit organization that hosts classes, workshops, events, and youth programs that are all public and designed for all ages. Their mission is to deepen the connection between people, each other, and the earth through land stewardship, education, and community. They accomplish this by teaching small-scale, place-based human skills, leading classes and workshops, facilitating collective educational experimentation, and practicing long-term regenerative foraging. Their classes include invasive species management, foraging, basket making, hand tool use, ancient technology, natural awareness, and many other crafts lost to large-scale production and consumption. Many universities are also jumping on the rewilding train through the program Rewild Your Campus, who are creating a movement to help college campuses become climate-resilient, biodiverse spaces. They are helping universities to stop their pesticide and herbicide usage and to plant native perennials that will regenerate the soil and benefit pollinators. The current ongoing projects are Oberlin Organic Pilot Project, Drexel University Goes Organic, Grinnell Rewilding and Organic Pilot Project, Emory University Organic Pilot Project, Organic Product Swaps at Brandeis University, Hawaii Public Schools Go Herbicide Free, University of California System bans glyphosate and revises pesticide policies, and UC Berkeley Goes Organic. My ultimate goal is to rewild my own university, but it's a very slow and grueling process with a lot of administrative red tape. Students should have access to their own food forests on campus where they can grow and learn as a community, and they shouldn't have to worry about inorganic chemical compounds being sprayed where they live and study. As I wrap up this research video, there's a couple questions that I want you to really think about and go and answer in the comments. When I say the word rewilding, what does that mean to you? What does a regenerative world look like to you? How do you feel about nature and the environment around you? And how does nature impact your daily life? Stay tuned for my upcoming video about rewilding perspectives, an analysis of what rewilding means to who. I'll be asking members of my family, cohorts, and community the same questions I asked you about what rewilding might mean to them. All of my sources are in the description below, and if you want to learn more about the regenerative transition movement, check out my partners at the Planet Project at planetproject.io.